Greetings and well met. Welcome to Stories by the Fireside. I am your host and narrator, Hailstorm, and today I shall read to you a portion of the wiki-page for the Imperium of Man, set in the universe of Warhammer 40,000. We start with the Imperium's history. The link for the page is in the description for your viewing pleasure. I have a disclaimer to make before we begin. I did not make nor contribute to the making of this wiki page, nor am I affiliated with or endorsed by the makers of it or Games Workshop. We begin. The Imperium of Man. The Martyr's Grave is the keystone of the Imperium, the Liber Imperialis. The Imperium of Man is a galaxy-spanning interstellar human empire, the ultimate authority of the majority of the human species in the Milky Way galaxy in the 41st millennium AD. It is ruled by the living god, who is known as the Emperor of Mankind. However, there are other humanoid species classified as Imperial citizens, mainly mutant offshoots of genetic baseline humans, who are known as abhumans, and include such human subraces as the Ogrins, Ratlings, and Squats. The founder and ruler of the Imperium is the godlike Emperor of Mankind, the most powerful human psyker ever born. The Emperor founded the Imperium over 10,000 Terran years ago in the late 13th millennium during the Unification Wars on Old Earth, following the terrible period in human history known as the Age of Strife. The Emperor continues, at least nominally, to rule the Imperium as both its political master and its primary religious figure. However, his badly damaged body is interred within the cybernetic life support mechanisms of the arcane device known as the Golden Throne, following his mortal wounding during the ancient interstellar civil war of the Horus Heresy. Because of this terrible fate, the Emperor is incapable of interacting with others on a day-to-day basis and has left the basic governance of his Imperium to the Senatorum Imperialis, an oligarchy ruling council of the most powerful noble lords and adepts in the galaxy. The Senatorum Imperialis is currently led by the Emperor's genetic son, the Primarch Robut Gulliman, who chairs the council and directs imperial policy as the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. The Imperium of Man is a war-torn stellar empire, teetering on the brink of collapse. For 10,000 Terran years it has been ruled by the Deathless Emperor, a being of almost limitless psychic power, to whom thousands of souls are sacrificed daily to provide him the psychic strength to maintain the Imperium's lines of communication and transport. The peoples of the Imperium live in a galaxy where demons are real, mutation is frequent, and death is a constant companion. To be alive in the 41st millennium is to know that the universe is a terrifying and hostile place. It is a place where you are but one amongst billions, and no matter how heroic your death, you will not be missed. A truly vast domain, the Imperium is spread amongst the many stars of the galaxy. Its territories encompass untold millions of stars and countless more human lives. In its name, terrible wars are fought and desperate sacrifices made, yet even this river of carnage and blood is a small price to pay, for the Imperium is the guardian of humanity. Were it to pass into nothingness, so too would the human species, destroyed by enemies uncountable, to the braying laughter of the Dark Gods. The Imperium is the largest and currently most powerful political entity in the galaxy, consisting of at least 1 million human settled worlds, dispersed across most of the Milky Way galaxy. Consequently, an imperial planet might be separated from its closest neighbor by hundreds or even thousands of light years. As a stellar empire, the size of the Imperium cannot be measured in terms of contiguous territory, but only in the number of planetary systems under its control. However, most humans in the galaxy have little day-to-day contact with the government of the Imperium unless they serve in one of its adepta or run afoul of its various protectors, such as the Inquisition or the Adeptus Arbites. The Imperium is primarily an interstellar tribute empire, allowing its member worlds to largely govern themselves as long as they recognize the authority of the emperor and his servants and support the state religion, the imperial cult, which holds the emperor to be the one true god of mankind. Every world of the Imperium must also pay the imperial taxes levied on them in the form of troops and material that is known as the imperial tithe. These resources go to the service of the Astra Militarum and the imperial navy, the armed forces which keep the Imperium united and safe. The imperial tithe supports the overall economy of the Imperium by redistributing resources where needed, usually to shore up one region of the Imperium where conflict is raging by drawing resources from more peaceful sectors. In general, the Imperium promotes the development of a neo-feudal political system, which the High Lords of Terra and the Inquisition have long believed to be the most stable form of human government. There are few human-settled worlds in the galaxy where any but the most wealthy nobles have any say in the government of their planet, and the imperial establishment generally characterizes any movements towards democracy, self-rule, or the overthrow of the neo-feudal system as outright heresy against the divine plan of the god Emperor. This intense need for political stability and the growing military demands upon the imperial system, presented by the myriad and growing threats of the 41st millennium, have created a repressive and stagnant galactic government. In the present Imperium, science and human progress have essentially been halted in service to the need to simply maintain the crumbling status quo. It is not for nothing that many imperial savants consider the current age the time of ending for mankind. Several alien species and dark mystical forces, Chaos, the Tyranids, the craft world Eldari, the Drukhari, the Orcs, the Tau, and the Undying Necrons, now challenge the supremacy of the Imperium and humanity's predominant place in the galaxy. From within its own creaking and increasingly stagnant and repressive edifice, the Imperium is threatened more insidiously by rebellion, mutation, dangerous psychers, and subversive chaos cults. However, despite its myriad problems, without the admittedly authoritarian and often harsh protection of the Imperium, mankind as a whole would have fallen prey to the countless perils that threaten it. Without the Imperium of Man and mankind's faith in the Emperor who guides it, the human race would have become extinct long ago. History. The road the human race has walked through history stretches long and bloody at their collective heels. Its origins are hidden by the swirling dust of eons, its present wreathed in the flames of war, and ahead the future yawns like a dark and forbidding pit. Still, imperial historians do what they can to preserve the truth of humanity's journey, even if none may survive to read it. Beneath the imperial palace complex on Terra lie thousands of kilometers of catacombs, hushed vaults, and scroll-stuffed libraries. They are protected by rune-sealed bulkheads so formidable they could endure sustained orbital bombardment. Their guardians are shadowy terrors, unsleeping, ever vigilant. So vast is their sprawl that predatory things have evolved amidst the shadows and the dust, ruling over trammeled ecosystems of pallid troglodyte vermin. The knowledge kept here under lock and key spans the great ages of humanity. Even this ultimate repository is mouldering and much eroded by entropy's inescapable touch, yet just those fragmented records that remain would take many lifetimes to study and contain secrets enough to blast the reader's sanity or bring the entire Imperium crashing down. It is, well, perhaps, that few even know of the endless archive's existence. Fewer still are permitted beyond their doors. The Imperium of Man was founded by the Emperor of Mankind, also called the God Emperor and the Master of Mankind, at the end of the Age of Strife in the 30th millennium AD. The Emperor, an immortal being born around the year 8000 BC in central Anatolia on Old Earth, was the collective reincarnation of all the human shamans who possessed true psychic abilities during the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. Imbued with their combined psychic, physical, and intellectual power, the Emperor was born an immortal being, a perpetual, of unparalleled physical strength, psychic ability, charisma, and intellect. The Emperor helped humanity as a whole survive and prosper through the long millennia. In various eras of human history, he intervened through various personas, some of them well-known historical personages, to guide humanity, though such interventions were always brief and shrouded in legend and historical mystery. At the end of the Age of Strife, in the 29th millennium, the man who would become the Emperor finally took a direct, public, and permanent role in shaping the future of humanity, believing that the damage done to the human species by 5,000 years of terror, isolation, and violence could not be reversed unless he openly guided humanity as its leader. As such, he shed all his prior identities and simply revealed himself in the late 29th millennium on Terra as the Emperor, determined to unite the entire species under his stern but benevolent rule. He intended to replace superstition, fear, poverty, and intolerance with reason, science, progress, and hope. Age of Terror, M1 to M15. No record now remains of humanity's first faltering steps into the interstellar void during the period remembered as the Age of Terror. Yet step they did, their confidence and skill increasing until steps became strides, became bounding leaps through space. Ancient Earth became the shining hub of a powerful interstellar human realm with Mars, the first world terraformed by humanity, standing proud as a bastion of technological innovation and scientific learning. Humanity's first encounters with alien races are not directly detailed, though fragments suggest that accords were struck with some, while wars were fought against others, most notably the ever-belligerent orcs. Little more can be said of this long-lost age of adventure and hope. Glimpses and echoes are all that survive. Age of Technology, M15 to M25. The first indications of human warp travel date from the early millennia of this age, in circa M15. They hint at gruesome disasters and many setbacks, yet it is clear that eventually the faster-than-light warp drive technology was perfected. The cultivation of the navigator gene and the establishment of the navigator houses came soon after, allowing vast leaps in interstellar travel and the establishment of a full-blown human empire amongst the stars. As humanity's power and influence grew, so too did its hubris. The indomitable spirit of human endeavor has ever risen to the sternest challenges. Interstellar exploration, trade, and, inevitably, warfare presented challenges like nothing mankind had faced before. Planetary colonization proceeded at a ferocious rate. It seems likely that during this era the human race splintered and reformed time and again into warring or competing power blocks and planetary empires, but nothing could destabilize human space as a whole. Human scientists, engineers, inventors, and innovators became the new gods. They worked alien technologies into their species' devices to increase their efficacy with little thought to the risks. They modified their species' genome to ever greater degrees, fashioning vast armies of tailored gene troopers whose humanity was all but lost amidst the array of freakish alterations worked upon their bodies and minds. They invented standard template construct machines, or STCs, that allowed human colonists to rapidly fashion everything they needed to dominate new worlds from whatever natural resources were available. They developed sentient nanoplagues, human-sundering directed energy weapons, and endless ranks of fearsome, artificially intelligent men of iron that could be unleashed upon those who refused to bend to their wills, alien and human alike. They fashioned thinking machines of vast intellect that administered to the every need of colony worlds transformed into glittering, utopian paradises. It was during this age also that humanity's psychic evolution is said to have accelerated apace, and therein lie the seeds of this first human empire's annihilation. Archistoritors, chronopatents, and inquisitors of the Order Hereticus have combed what scraps of information exist from this era, and have agreed upon two things. First, that it is impossible now to separate fact from fiction, and second, that the first mentions of human psyches appear around the end of M22 are near ubiquitous across humanity's world by late M23, and that absolute anarchy is said to have engulfed the worlds of mankind soon after. The collapse was sudden and appalling, a wave of apocalyptic catastrophe that swept across human space. Terrible wars saw entire star systems scoured of life. Armies of mechanical soldiers marched against their creators and slaughtered billions. The scourge of mutation ran rampant, and everywhere psychic atrocities were unleashed, everything from psychics claiming godhood over entire worlds to demonic possession and full-blown reality collapse as the warp breached the dimensional barrier and invaded real space. Then came the most ferocious warp storms that had been seen in all of mankind's history, cutting off all interstellar travel, trade, and communication. Collapse followed swiftly. Age of Strife, from M25 to M30. The Age of Strife, also sometimes remembered as Old Night, was a 5,000-year-long period of anarchy, war, and destructive technological regression from the 25th to the 30th millennia that brought mankind to the brink of extinction, and reversed the highly advanced scientific and technological discoveries made by the interstellar human civilization of the age of technology that had preceded it. The Age of Strife was caused by the negative psychic and physical effects of the vicious warp storms that ravaged large portions of the galaxy beginning on the 23rd or 25th millennium, depending on the source, which were the ripples in real space of the psychic gestation of the new chaos god Slaanesh in the Immaterium. If the previous age had been one of prosperity and enlightenment, the Age of Strife was its dark mirror. It is hard for historians of the 41st millennium to separate fact from insane ramblings or prophecies of doom, but it appears the terrible wars tagged across the length and breadth of humanity's galactic domain. Many worlds were consumed entirely, while even those whose populations endured were cut off from one another by the warp storms ravaging real space. During this era of isolation and hardship, many human colonies underwent drastic and widespread mutation. Some were destroyed by it, for those mutations were the result of warp energies saturating their flesh and engulfing their worlds. Others underwent more natural processes of adaptation and evolution, transforming into abhumans such as ogrons, rattlings, stilt limbs, or beastmen. Many wondrous advancements were lost or fell into disrepair, most of the SCT technologies amongst them. During the Age of Strife, Slaanesh was forming within the warp as a result of the growing hedonism and utter excess of the ancient Eldari Empire in the millennia before its fall. One result of the warp storms produced by this long gestation was the impossibility of faster-than-light travel or astro-telepathic interstellar communication through the ravaged currents of the warp, which led to the subsequent isolation of human colony worlds and star systems separated by multi-light-year distances. Human civilization in the colonized portion of the galaxy fragmented, and where it survived, it took on wildly different forms. On old Earth, the planetary economy collapsed with the loss of interstellar trade and communication with the rest of humanity, even as the social order broke down. Subjected to terror millennia of isolation, hardship, invasion, and horror, countless worlds plunged into post-apocalyptic barbarism. Amongst them was old Earth itself. Wars, rebellion, and the diseases that inevitably followed in their wake were rampant. Vast swaths of the advanced scientific and technical knowledge accumulated in the previous millennia was lost or forgotten, and a slow descent into pre-industrial barbarism seemed inevitable for Earth and many of its colonies. On the human homeworld, brutal warlords emerged from amidst the strife and disorder, who carved out new kingdoms to serve as their fiefdoms. The emergence of these often brutal neo-feudal kingdoms, the new nation-states of the people later termed techno-barbarians by imperial historians, imposed an uneasy peace on the earth that was frequently interrupted by feudal conflicts. The human species seemed on the brink of extinction by the end of the 29th millennium, and then, in humanity's darkest hour, came the man who would become known as the Emperor of Mankind. Great Crusade, M30 to M31. Legend tells how, at the end of the Age of Strife, the human homeworld writhed in the grip of terrible wars beyond count before the Emperor came. techno-barbarians battled collectors of gene soldiers through the blazing ruins of once great archaeologies. Cannibal savages unleashed unholy psychic powers upon legions of cyborg zealots. Grand warlords, demagogues, and psychoproto-deities rose and fell, each one threatening to finally take the planet and its people with them into damnation. Yet the man who had become known as the Emperor sensed that the warp storms that had marked the Age of Strife were starting to subside, and that this offered an opportunity for humanity to reunite in pursuit of a new golden age. The Emperor first emerged from his secret fortress beneath the Himalayan mountains in the late 29th millennium. He sought to unify all the techno-barbarian states of ancient Terra under his rule through either diplomacy or the waging of the brutal military campaigns later called the Unification Wars against the techno-barbarian tribes that ruled vast swaths of the Earth's blighted surface. These wars were waged with superhuman soldiers, later known as the Thunder Warriors, who had been genetically engineered by the Emperor's genius from his early followers to be faster and stronger than baseline humans. Such warriors could provide the early foundation from which he would later decide to create the Space Marines. After conquering the last of the independent techno-barbarian states of old Earth, the Emperor began to lay the foundations of his burgeoning empire. At last, the Age of Strife was over. Hope was restored. Yet hope has ever been humanity's addiction and curse both. Understanding that no one man, even one such as he, could rule alone, the Emperor formed his war council, comprised of his most able generals and a number of high-ranking administrators, the most formidable of whom was Malcador the Sigillite. Malcador was not a warrior, but a man of learning with the bearing of a priest. His origins were unknown to all save perhaps the Emperor himself, to whom some believed Malcador was distantly related. Malcador was appointed to administer the newly constructed imperial palace and court in the Himalayan mountains, and through this appointment also governed newly conquered Terra as his master's left hand. Where Terra had been a place of unending war, it now became a place of unceasing activity, production, and planning. Just as the conquest of old Earth was complete, a mighty and unforeseen cosmic event occurred. A massive shockwave blasted across the Imperium, clearing the warp storms that had plunged the galaxy into tumult and raged for more than 5,000 standard years. It seemed to some to be divine providence, fueling the beliefs of those that considered the Emperor to be himself divine, no matter how much he decried this claim. The way to the galaxy was now open, and the Emperor's armies would be able to take to the stars, with the other planets of Terra's solar system the first step upon that road. After conquering the last of the independent techno-barbarian states of the renamed world of Terra, the Emperor secured the allegiance of the techno-mystic cult Mechanicus of Mars, who controlled the most advanced remaining industrial fabrication and scientific research facilities in the human-settled galaxy. The Emperor promised in the Treaty of Mars to protect the tech priests' religion and respect the sovereignty of the Mechanicum and the autonomy of their forge worlds across the galaxy, affording them a level of independence unequaled within the Imperium. Furthermore, the Emperor gave to the service of the Mechanicum 6 of the houses of navigators, so that their ships might once again travel safely through the warp after the loss of their own thrall navigators centuries before. The powerful Fabricator General of Mars was given a seat on the War Council of the Great Crusade. With access to the giant Manufactoria of Mars, this enabled the Emperor to vastly increase the power of his legions with improved war gear and supply. In addition, the tech priests of Mars lent their arts to the construction of the massive warp-capable battleships that could transport the Emperor's legions across the galaxy, and provided the mighty city-crushing war machines known as the Titans to the ever-expanding Imperial military. The Treaty of Mars married the Terran military might of the Emperor with the industrial strength of Mars and the Mechanicum. Now possessed of the needed manpower and material to make his dream a reality, the Emperor mobilized the resources of Terra and Mars to launch a vast new military campaign intended to reunite the whole of mankind, dispersed across the galaxy under his rule. This campaign, the Great Crusade, marked the founding era of the period that would later be known as the Age of the Imperium. A vast fleet of starships was built in orbit of Mars, with which the Emperor's army set out to reconquer the galaxy for mankind. But even before he had begun his campaign to reunite old Earth, the Emperor had used his highly advanced knowledge of genetic engineering and the psychic arts to create the Primarchs, 20 superhuman military commanders possessed of preternatural physical, mental, and social attributes, who had been created through the fusion of variants of his own genetic material with the power of the warp. The Emperor had known that the greatest foe of his plans to reunite humanity and bring order to the galaxy would be the ruinous powers of chaos and their demonic servants. He had sought to protect his gestating Primarchs from the Dark Gods, where they grew in their gestation capsules, and the Emperor's secret laboratories deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, but the Chaos Gods saw through all his wards and protections. They opened a warp portal in the Emperor's own laboratory and stole the infant Primarchs away from Terra, scattering them across the galaxy and tainting many of them with the power of chaos. Undeterred by this tragedy, the Emperor utilized what remained of the Primarch's genetic material. He had first crafted the Thunder Warriors to unite old Earth. He then proceeded in the last days of the Unification Wars to transform ordinary Terran men into a new corps of transhuman warriors who would lead mankind back out into the stellar void. These men were the Emperor's Space Marines, the Legionis Astartes, superhuman warriors who knew no fear. Thanks to influxes of technology and resources from around the Sol system, the Space Marine legions were soon growing in number and capability at an exponential rate. The Space Marine legions were to be the spearhead of the Emperor's attempt to reunite mankind, the Great Crusade's killing edge against which the strength of a foe would be broken, and which would topple empires, human or alien, by ripping out their hearts. With Mars now part of the Imperium, the Great Crusade began in earnest, and the rest of the Sol system was the first region of space to be conquered by the Emperor and his newly rearmed and re-equipped Space Marine legions. The Legionis Astartes secured the scientific research installations and space docks of Luna, which had once been controlled by the Selenar gene rights. Broken and humbled, the enslaved gene rights of Luna would help forge the next generation of Space Marines who would carry out mankind's conquest of the stars. Alien invaders were flushed from the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and their wretched enslaved human inhabitants repatriated to Earth. The once human creatures of the Neptunian deeps were exterminated without mercy, and the baleful false world of Setna, a soul's edged light, was boiled away to vapor under the guns of the new forged Imperial War fleet. The next step was beyond. The Great Crusade was a mammoth operation on inconceivable scale and complexity that involved billions of troops and tens of thousands of void ships, and it is perhaps true that only a mind such as the Emperor's could have had a hope of successfully comprehending and executing it. In order to manifest this conquest, the Imperium's forces were divided up into an expanding and frequently reconfigured series of Imperial expeditionary fleets, semi-autonomous battle groups assigned to voyage the stars and make war in the Emperor's name. They were composed in chief of a bewildering array of void ships great and small. The paths of these fleets were dictated both in general by the Emperor and his war council, but also by the will of their commanders, who were entrusted to seek out the enslaved and destroy the alien under their own sway. During the 200 standard years that the Great Crusade spread the Imperium across the galaxy, the Emperor slowly made contact once more with all of his scattered gene sons, the Primarchs, and to each he gave command of the Space Marine Legion that had been created from that Primarch's genome. Horus was the first of the Primarchs to be rediscovered on the barren mining world of Chthoniya, only a few light years from Terra itself. Horus campaigned with the Emperor for 30 Terran years before the next of the Primarchs was recovered, and during that time the two developed a special bond, the deep affection between a father and his favored son. The Astartes legions, combined with the might of the Imperial army, which was later separated into the Astra Militarum and the Imperial Navy after the Horus heresy, reunited thousands upon thousands of human-settled worlds into one interstellar civilization in the name and under the rule of the Emperor and the Imperium of Man. But the Great Crusade was ended abruptly by the corruption and treachery of the Imperial War Master Horus, who was both the Primarch of the Sons of Horus Legion and the overall military commander of the Great Crusade in his last days. This was an honor that had been granted to him by the Emperor, who had sought to leave the campaign so that he might return to Terra and oversee a highly secret project intended to open the Eldari webway to human use. But Horus and many of the other Primarchs deeply resented the Emperor's absence from the Great Crusade, and were even more disturbed by his attempts to replace the direct rule of the Imperium by the Emperor and his Primarchs with a bureaucracy of normal humans. Having established the Council of Terra, the new governing body of the Imperium to carry out the day-to-day work of ruling tens of thousands of worlds and trillions of human beings, the Emperor took refuge in his vast laboratories and workshops beneath the Imperial Palace. He began to work in earnest on his new project to secretly extend the webway to Terra, an enterprise that the Emperor hoped would be his greatest gift to humanity. While the Emperor was locked away in his subterranean factories, trouble was brewing. The formation of the Council of Terra proved to be a contentious decision with the distant Primarchs, who were appalled when news of the formation of the Council finally reached them on the frontiers of the Great Crusade. Some of the Primarchs took great exception to being ruled by those mortals that they had deemed less worthy and capable of such an honor than themselves. The less stable Primarchs felt that this was a betrayal of all they had fought and won in the Emperor's name, and that their victories now counted for nothing. They and many of their Astartes felt that it was they who had suffered and sacrificed the most to build the Imperium, and thus it was they who should have the greatest say in how it was ruled, not a council composed of effete Terran nobles and faceless mortal bureaucrats. This was one of the many growing resentments that allowed the ruinous powers to infect and corrupt several of the Primarchs. Driven by jealousy and ambition, Horus proved to be easy prey for the temptations of the Chaos Gods, and the machinations of his own brother Logar, the Primarch of the Wordbearers Legion, had come into the secret service of Chaos during the course of the Great Crusade. Given the opportunity, the Dark Gods falsely convinced the arrogant Warmaster that the Emperor had intended all along to simply use the Primarchs and the rest of humanity to transform himself into a god. Enraged and offended at this notion, the ruinous powers then promised Horus their support in his bid to seize the Imperium for himself. Horus ultimately convinced 9 other Primarchs and their Space Marine legions to join his cause and serve the designs of Chaos. He instigated the terrible Horus Heresy, a galaxy-wide rebellion against the Emperor, and eventually one half of the Imperium's vast military forces, as well as elements of the Mechanicum, rallied to the traitor's cause, unleashing the greatest conflict mankind had ever known upon an unsuspecting galaxy. Horus Heresy, M31. The Horus Heresy was fought across the galaxy for more than 9 Terran years, beginning in circa 005 M31, with the terrible Istavan III atrocity, where Horus cleansed 4 of the traitor legions under his command of their remaining loyalist elements, and the Dropside Massacre of Istavan V, where Horus and his traitor legions nearly decimated 3 entire loyalist Space Marine legions through their most base of treacheries. Horus sought to achieve a swift and decisive victory over the Emperor after pledging his soul to the service of the ruinous powers of the Warp, leading his traitor forces directly to Terra 7 standard years after the battles in the Istavan system, slaughtering tens of billions of people and destroying much of what the Emperor had built over the last 2 centuries. In a final decisive battle between the Emperor and Horus at the end of the Great Siege of Terra in 014 M31, the War Master was slain, leading to the end of the rebellion, when the forces of Chaos naturally began to turn on one another without Horus's ambition, titanic charisma, and influence to keep them united in pursuit of a single goal. Over the next several years, the traitor legions and their Chaos allies slowly withdrew from human space, eventually fleeing Imperial pursuit into the Great Warp Rift in the Segmentum Obscurus, known as the Eye of Terror. However, the Master of Mankind was himself mortally wounded during the battle, which took place on Horus' chaos-twisted battle barge, the Vengeful Spirit, in orbit above Terra. The Emperor's body was recovered by the Primarch Rogol Dawn of the Imperial Fist Legion, and according to his last instructions, the Emperor was placed on the life-preserving Golden Throne, an arcane artifact dating from the Dark Age of technology that served as both a psychic amplifier and a potent cybernetic life support system that the Emperor had originally intended to use to create his portal into the webway. For over 10,000 Terran years now, the Emperor has remained immobile on the Golden Throne. Though physically a broken, dying carcass incapable of movement and unable to communicate normally with the outside world, save through the rare telepathic contact and the Emperor's turret, the Emperor's psychic will, almost omnipotent, extends through the Immaterium across the million worlds of the Imperium. It produces the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon that is used by all Imperial starships to travel through the warp, soul-binds weaker psychic humans to make them useful sanctioned psychics of the Imperium, while leeching the lives from 1,000 other psychics every solar day to sustain his psychic presence, and struggles against the encroaching demons of the warp, protecting mankind from their real space predations. In all this, the Emperor endures the constant agony of his dying body only through a sheer exercise of will, and a sustenance that the life forces of the sacrificed psychics provide. Yet the masses of humanity worship the Emperor as both a god and their only savior. It is an article of faith in the Imperial cult that against all the threats faced by the human species, only the Emperor protects. Great Scouring. In the wake of the Horus heresy, the Imperium was a dismal, shattered thing. As the beauty and grandeur of the Imperial palace had been burned black in the flames of betrayal, so great swaths of the Emperor's star-spanning realm has suffered a similar fate. The master of mankind was a broken husk, and his dream of unity erased forever. Yet for all this, the Imperium retained might enough to exact a bloody revenge upon its foes. There could be no forgiveness for the crimes of the traitor legions. Those who now ruled in the Emperor's name had neither the ability nor the desire to prevent a war of reciprocity. So began the time known in the histories of the Imperium as the Great Scouring. Before actually being confined for all time within the life support mechanisms of the Golden Throne, the Emperor had pronounced judgment on the traitors. He declared them excommunicate traitoris, and determined that they were to be driven into the hellish region of the warp rift called the Eye of Terror, which would hold them for all eternity. All records and memory of the traitor legions were to be expunged from the Imperial archives. Worlds such as Istvan V, the traitor legion homeworlds, and Davin would be scoured clean of all life because of their corruption by chaos. The traitor legions associated troops from the Dark Mechanicum, the Titan legions, or the regiments and starships of the Imperial army that had turned to chaos were to be destroyed or also driven into the Eye of Terror. It would be as if the traitor legions had never existed to sully the Imperium with their betrayal. This was a period of monumental violence, of confusion and darkness. Though the newly founded Imperium fought to root out corruption and expose wrongdoers to the cold light of Imperial justice, the galaxy's sheer scope and dark shadowed reaches worked against them. With new betrayals and cries for vengeance emerging daily, a great many bloody-handed deeds went unseen. The ravaged Space Marine legions were no exception to this, with many striving to cover up their own misdemeanors or exact their pound of flesh from those who had wronged them. The Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, Iron Hands, and even the Ultramarines all followed their own agendas as the wars of the Great Scouring gathered pace. Fighting continued for years after the heresy had ended with Horus's death on the bridge of his great flagship before the traitor forces were wholly destroyed or exiled into the Eye of Terror. Many chaos-corrupted star systems were cleansed and placed under the watch of the newborn Inquisition. Horus's death had not ended the fighting, but it had renewed the resolve of the Loyalists to destroy the traitors. Many Imperial worlds during the heresy had refused to commit their forces to either side, or seceded entirely from the Imperium to regain their independence. Such indecision was punished by Loyalist and traitor forces alike. These forces were often bled white, attacking the rebel strongholds of worlds that only wanted to be free of the Imperium entirely, whether it were allegiance to the Emperor or to the Dark Gods. Changes swept both the Imperial military and the offices of government. The Space Marine legions, the vast fighting formations so instrumental in mankind's victories during the Great Crusade, were broken down into many smaller chapters comprised of 1,000 Astartes. Overseen by Rupert Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion and the Lord Commander of the Imperium in the wake of the Emperor's ascension, he penned his magnum opus, the Codex Astartes, a great and sacred tome which covered every conceivable topic of military organization, strategy, and tactics. This transition allowed for greater tactical flexibility without placing the command of an entire Space Marine Legion into the hands of one individual. Never again would the awesome power of 100,000 Space Marines be misused. The loyalist Space Marine legions, called the Shattered Legions, had been decimated during the Dropsite Massacre on Istavan V. The Raven Guard, Iron Hands, and Salamanders were slowly re-established using what little gene seed the survivors had managed to escape with. The original first founding Space Marine legions were divided into small successor chapters. One chapter maintained their parent legion's original name, badge, and honor, while the remaining chapters took new names and heraldry. These original chapters are known as the Second Founding Chapters, an event which occurred in the early 31st millennium and coincided with the beginning of what was known as the Reformation of the Imperium. Another vast change wrought upon the Imperium's mighty military redefined the nature of the Imperial Army. Once including both the great battleships that plied the stars and the countless mortal soldiers that landed to fight planetside, now the two were divided into the Imperial Navy and Astra Militarum, colloquially known as the Imperial Guard. Across all the agencies of the Imperium, offices and institutions were split, their previous responsibilities fractionalized into separate functions and departments. Many of the countless branches within the sprawling Adeptus Administratum were spawned at this time. With the instigation of these changes, it was not unusual for two separate organizations, each unaware of the other, to be tasked with the same jobs, such as verificator scribes and TIFE enumerators poring over the same data, each producing the same reports. These Byzantine systems were put in place as fail-safe measures, which have since spiraled out of control into administrative excess. Beyond any such bureaucracies and standing watch over all was the newly formed Inquisition, a secretive paramilitary police organization outside the established hierarchies. Ever vigilant, its role was to question everything in the constant search for threats to humanity. None save the Emperor himself escaped the Inquisition's uncompromising and watchful gaze. Imperial stagnation. Mankind stands upon the brink. On the one hand lies a realm of unimaginable power, on the other awaits darkness, death, and utter damnation. Only those that follow the guiding light of the Emperor may save their souls. Inquisitor Daman, Ordo Malleus. The Imperium of Man at the end of the 41st millennium is a dystopic society by the standards of the people of the 21st millennium. The unexpected horrors of the Horus Heresy fatally weakened the nascent Imperium, but more importantly, starting with the Emperor himself, claimed some of its best warriors, technocrats, administrators, and diplomats, who fell either in battle with the traitor legions or were corrupted by chaos themselves. But perhaps the most significant consequence seems to have been that, like the Emperor, the Imperium itself entered a slow decaying stasis, while chaos and the Imperium's myriad Xenos enemies are ascendant. It is known that the period immediately following the heresy was one of near anarchy, and that the continuity of the Imperium was not assured. Robert Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, was one of those credited with taking decisive action that kept the Imperium together as its ruling Lord Commander, possibly with the help of other loyalist forces and of new imperial organizations, such as the Inquisition and the Officio Assassinorum. The assassin temples had been secretly established during the Great Crusade by Malcador the Sigillite, and a Calidus assassin had successfully assassinated Conrad Curse, the Primarch of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. Ironically, while the Imperium survived its first time of testing, it also seems to be fulfilling predictions or prophecies made about its future by a variety of chaos enemies, traitors, or more neutral and potentially sympathetic observers, like the Eldari. Supreme among such ironic twists is the deification of the Emperor and the attendant creation of the Ecclesiarchy, the galaxy-wide state church dedicated to the Imperial Creed that teaches that the Emperor is the god of mankind. The Emperor's expressed purpose, and one of the pillars of the pre-heresy imperial doctrine known as the Imperial Truth, that was spread by the imperial forces during the Great Crusade, was the elimination of superstition and of belief in supernatural powers, gods, and religion, and the promotion of reason and science. It is worth noting that among the ploys used by the ruler's powers to turn Horus to their service were uncannily accurate visions of the post-heresy Imperium, in which the Emperor and his loyalist primarchs were worshipped by the imperial masses as a god and his saints, respectively. Of course, unknown to Horus, this was a future caused by his actions, not prevented by them. Another measure of the Imperium's stagnation has been the lack of real technological progress over the last 10,000 Terran years, and a fear of unknown or ancient technology that sometimes borders on irrational superstition. It seems that the last era of major human technological advancement was the era of discoveries and technological applications made during the planning and executing of the Great Crusade. In short, the Imperium has become a repressive regime marked by extreme levels of superstition, political repression, religious intolerance, bureaucratization, economic stagnation, technological regression, and inequality. Corruption and injustice are rampant, and human life is increasingly worth very little in a galaxy teeming with trillions of people. But though the Imperium is repressive and stagnant, it is also the only thing holding the enemies of humanity at bay. Many in the highest levels of the Imperium know that it must reform if it is to survive, but they fear that the cure might very well kill the patient. And in small pockets of the Imperium, there are men and women willing to shoulder the burden of making their small corner of the universe a better place for all by shouldering the responsibilities and the burdens of heroes. The Gathering Storm. Things have only been made worse with the birth of the Great Rift, or Cicatrix Maledictum, in circa 999 M41, following the successful completion of Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, and the fall of the fortress world of Cadia. The Great Rift is a massive warp storm that now stretches across the galaxy from the Eye of Terror in the galactic west to the Hadix anomaly in the east. No one fully understands the origins of the Great Rift, though there are many theories. The breach of the Cadian Gate during the Despoiler's recent 13th Black Crusade, the sorcery of the Daemon Primarch Magnus the Red during the Thousand Suns invasion of the Fenris system, catastrophe in the Webway, mass bloodshed, and fire in the Damocles Gulf, all may have caused or contributed to it. Its emergence was a literal galaxy-shattering event, which threw the Imperium of Man into chaos and ushered in new wars across nearly every world in the Emperor's domain. So powerful and far-reaching was this warp rift that the very laws of physics fray at its edges, as the inconsistencies of temporal fluctuations, once largely localized to larger warp storms, such as the Eye of Terror, spread across the galaxy. Some worlds felt standard centuries go by in an instant, while others were all but frozen in time, and still others have suffered constant temporal shifts. On the far side of the galaxy-spanning warp rift from Holy Terra, things have quite literally gone to hell. There the light of the Astronomicon is obscured behind a psychic maelstrom of nightmares, and the entire region has been dubbed the Imperial Nihilus, or the Dark Imperium. Many of those planets in the vicinity of the Great Rift have disappeared entirely, or been so corrupted that they are now labelled as demon worlds. In response to the emerging forces of chaos throughout the galaxy, the recently resurrected Ruput Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, now once more the Lord Commander of the Imperium and its vast armies, has launched his Indominatus crusade. Gathering his new armada along with elements of the Adeptus Custodes, a small contingent of the Silent Sisterhood, and a vast war host of Primaris Space Marines from many newly founded chapters, the Primarch and the other fleets of the Crusade have set a winding course. Strike forces from over a dozen pre-existing chapters of Space Marines, led by the Imperial Fists, have joined the Indomitus Crusade fleets. Thus began many new legends as Gulliman and the other Indomitus fleets travelled to aid beleaguered Imperial planets, breaking sieges and sweeping away invaders, to bring back hope to the desperate defenders. It was not long before word began to spread as those worlds that could still receive astropathic messages hailed the return of a hero out of myth. Once more, one of the demigods of the past fought for the Imperium of mankind. Even so, the Adeptus Mechanicus secretly reported to the High Lords of Terra that in addition to all the other problems besetting the Imperium, the mechanisms of the Golden Throne are malfunctioning, and they no longer possess the necessary knowledge to repair them. Whether the nobles of the Imperium like it or not, the Imperium will either begin to change in the direction of its resurrected Lord Commander, or it will die, the throats of its people cut by the myriad wolves already circling its shattered realms. This is where we end. There will be a continuation of this particular reading session, so stay tuned for the future. Thank you for coming, and may you all have a pleasant day or night.